blanket that she had was cast aside, and the TV guide was on the floor, so it suggests she might have been sort of startled there.
On a cold Saturday evening in January 2013, an 86-year-old widow named Una Crown was murdered inside her own home in Wisbech, England. The next morning, the two police officers who arrived at her bungalow looked at the scene and decided she had died in an accident. They were catastrophically wrong. Una Crown had been stabbed to death, her body set on fire to hide it, and because the police failed to recognize a murder scene when they were standing in one, evidence was washed, the house was left unprotected, and her killer walked free. One elderly widow, one quiet bungalow, 12 years of nothing. For over a decade, the man who did it lived just streets away, walking his dog past her home, passing the time of day with neighbors, an ordinary local face nobody looked at twice. He was hiding in plain sight. But in her final, desperate moments, Una Crown had done something extraordinary. And 12 years later, it would reach up from beneath her own fingernails and name the man who killed her. Welcome to Crime Watch UK, where no case stays cold forever. Let's go back to the beginning. Wisbech, a market town in Cambridgeshire, in the east of England. Flat fenland country. Quiet streets, the kind of place where neighbors know each other and an elderly woman can grow old feeling safe. On Magazine Lane lived Una Crown. She was 86 years old. Una was a retired postmistress. Her husband, Ron, had died in 2009. They'd had no children. So Una lived alone in her little bungalow, but she was far from lonely and far from frail in spirit. The judge who later heard her case described her beautifully. She was, he said, a slight lady, just 4 foot 10 inches tall. But though advanced in years, she was vigorously independent. She cooked, cleaned, and cared for herself. She enjoyed the company of friends, family, and neighbors. Her family called her feisty, not afraid to speak her mind, not afraid to stand up for herself. And she was, in one crucial way, very careful. Una Crown was described as extremely security conscious. She kept her house locked, even when she was inside it. She was a woman who did not let just anyone through her door. Remember that. It matters enormously. On Saturday, the 12th of January, 2013, everything was normal. At around 5 o'clock that evening, Una spoke on the phone to her neighbor. All was well. She said she'd had her dinner and washed up the dishes. Then she chose the television programs she wanted to watch, settled into the armchair in her sitting room, and pulled a blanket over her knees against the cold. An ordinary Saturday night, an 86-year-old woman, safe in her own home, about to watch a bit of telly. And at some point that evening, someone came into her house. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken window, no smashed door, which meant the intruder either had a key or somehow got Una to let him in. And we know, from everything about her, that Una Crown would not have opened her door to a stranger at night. Which tells you something chilling. The man who came into her home that night was not a stranger. We're not going to dwell on the brutal details of what happened next, because Una deserves better than that. But you need to understand the truth of it, because it's the truth the police very nearly buried. There was a confrontation. Una, all 4 foot 10 of her, got up from her chair and, the judge found, almost certainly told the intruder to get out. She tried to reach the phone to call for help. It was later found hanging off its cradle. She was attacked, and she fought. Even at 86, she put up her hands to try to stop him, leaving what forensic experts call defensive injuries. She was stabbed to death in her own hallway. And then the killer did something calculated. He tried to set fire to her body and her home, lighting several small fires, for one reason: to destroy the evidence of what he'd done. The fires only partly caught. They scorched the body and the walls, then largely burned themselves out. But the intent was clear. He was trying to erase himself from that house. He very nearly got his wish, not because the fire worked, but because of what the police did next. On the morning of Sunday, the 13th of January, Una's body was discovered by a relative. And here is where this case becomes not just a tragedy, but a scandal. The police officers who arrived looked at the scene, an 86-year-old woman, dead on the floor, burned, surrounded by blood, and concluded that her death was not suspicious. Their theory, that the frail old lady had accidentally set herself on fire, perhaps at the stove, tried to put it out with a tea towel, and then died of a heart attack. Let that sink in. There was blood, there were handprints on the floor and the walls, and it was not initially recognized for what it was. Because they decided it was an accident, the house was not sealed off. It was not treated as a murder scene. Evidence was not protected. A key was actually washed. For 2 days, the home of a murdered woman was handled as if nothing criminal had happened at all. Then, on the 15th of January, a post-mortem examination was carried out, and the truth came out in an instant. Una Crown had not died in an accident. She had been stabbed to death, with deep wounds to her neck and chest. This was murder. It had always been murder. But by the time the police realized it, the damage was done. A review would later find that flawed decisions had been made. The 2 officers first on the scene were found to have breached professional standards. A coroner would go on to openly condemn the bungling of the investigation. The killer had been handed something almost no murderer ever gets: a crime scene that the police themselves had compromised. The trail, before it had even properly begun, was already going cold. And so the years began to pass. The police tried. They launched appeals. In April 2013, there was a reconstruction on the BBC's Crime Watch. Over the following years, there were fresh appeals, more Crime Watch features, and eventually a reward of up to £20,000 offered for information. In 2014, 2 men were arrested in connection with Una's death and released without charge. Nothing stuck. No one was charged. The case became one of the most infamous unsolved murders in the region, a symbol of a police force that had failed an old woman in the most basic way. 1 decade passed. Una Crown's murder sat unsolved, and the man who did it, he was still right there, in Wisbech, living his life. Because here is the part of this story that gives you chills. The killer had never left. His name was David Newton, and he wasn't some drifter passing through town. He was a local. He lived in the area, and this is the detail that defines this entire case. He regularly walked his dog past Una Crown's home. He knew her. He had done odd jobs for her. In fact, in the spring of 2012, less than a year before the murder, David Newton had fixed the lock on her bungalow. He would pass the time of day with her when he walked around town. He even described her, in his own words, as a very nice, very kind little lady. For 12 years, David Newton lived as an ordinary Wisbech neighbor. Nobody looked at him twice. He hid in plain sight, not behind a disguise, not behind a false name, but behind the simple, unremarkable face of a man walking his dog down the same streets he always had. But Una Crown, in her last moments, had already caught him. She just needed the science to catch up. Think back to that struggle in the hallway. Una, fighting for her life, putting up her hands against the man attacking her. In that desperate struggle, she scratched him, and in doing so, she captured something under her fingernails: his DNA. In 2013, the police did take fingernail clippings from Una Crown. They were collected and sealed in an evidence bag. But there were 2 problems. The first, the DNA technology of 2013 wasn't good enough. When they tested the material under her nails back then, the science could only identify Una's own DNA. The killer's was there, but the tools couldn't see it. And the second problem is almost unbelievable. In the years after the murder, those fingernail clippings, the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case, went missing. The one thing that could name the killer had, at some point, been lost. But the clippings were eventually recovered, and by 2023, a full decade after the murder, forensic science had transformed. The cold case was reopened, and the material from under Una Crown's fingernails was tested again, with technology that simply hadn't existed in 2013. This time, it worked. Buried in that microscopic material, alongside Una's own DNA, was a second profile, the DNA of the man who had stabbed her to death. And when they ran that profile, it came back to a name that was already in the file: David Newton. Because here's the final twist. David Newton had actually been arrested back in 2013 on suspicion of murder and released without charge for lack of evidence. He had been in their hands once, and he'd walked out. For 10 more years, he'd lived free, convinced he'd gotten away with it. The neighbor with the dog, the kind old lady's odd job man. Now, a decade later, Una Crown's own fingernails had dragged him back. There was more that pointed his way too. Remember that there was no forced entry, that Una, so security conscious, must have known whoever came in. David Newton had fixed her lock, and the judge would later find, as a fact, that Newton had secretly had a copy of her backdoor key made for himself when he'd bought her a replacement months earlier. He had a key to her home. She never knew. And on the very evening of the murder, a local resident had seen David Newton walking in the vicinity of Una Crown's home. The picture was complete. In April 2024, David Newton was charged with murder. The case went to trial at Cambridge Crown Court. And the investigation this time, after that disastrous start in 2013, was, in the judge's own words, impressive. The police and prosecutors analyzed over 10,000 items of material. The judge called it the largest disclosure exercise the constabulary had ever undertaken. On the 13th of February 2025, a jury found David Newton guilty of the murder of Una Crown. The next day, the judge delivered his sentencing remarks, and they laid out, in careful detail, what had really happened in that bungalow 12 years earlier. The judge found that Newton had entered Una's home uninvited that night, that there was no motive to kill. The judge believed Newton, who had a history of wandering into other people's homes, simply looking for company and conversation, had let himself in, wanting someone to talk to. But Una, terrified, confronted him and told him to leave. And faced with her resistance, Newton picked up a long knife from her own kitchen and launched what the judge called a ferocious and sustained knife attack on a defenseless old lady in her own home. He then set the fires to try to hide it. And afterward, he emptied her purse, taking 80 pounds, which he paid into his own bank account 2 days later. The judge did not spare him. He listed the aggravating features one by one. That Una was particularly vulnerable because of her age and her tiny stature, that she had endured significant mental and physical suffering, that there had been an interlude between Newton entering the house and the fatal attack, during which, the judge said, she must have been, quite simply, terrified, that Newton had tried to destroy her body to hide his identity, that he had attacked her in her own home at night as a trespasser, and that he had stolen her cash afterward. David Newton was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. And the judge did one more thing. He thanked Una Crown's family for the dignity with which they had carried themselves through what he called an entirely harrowing trial. After the verdict, the senior detective, Detective Superintendent Ian Moore, said plainly what needed to be said. Mistakes were made during the initial investigation in 2013, for which we have apologized to Una's family. An apology, 12 years late, but an apology, and a conviction at last. Think about what this case really tells us. Una Crown was failed twice. First by the man who came into her home and murdered her, and then by the very people who were supposed to catch him. Officers who looked at a stabbed, burned woman and decided she'd had an accident. That failure gave David Newton 12 years of freedom. 12 years of walking his dog past the house where he'd killed her. 12 years of being just another face in a small town. But there was one thing neither the killer nor the bungled investigation could undo. In her final moments, an 86-year-old woman who was not afraid to stand up for herself reached out and fought back. And in fighting back, she took a piece of her killer with her and held on to it under her own fingernails until the science of the future was ready to read it. David Newton hid in plain sight for 12 years. He very nearly hid forever, but Una Crown caught him herself. No case stays cold forever. If this story moved you, do one thing for a feisty, kind little lady who was failed by the people meant to protect her, and who, in the end, helped catch her own killer. Subscribe to Crime Watch UK and turn on notifications so you're there the moment the next cold case that everyone gave up on finally reaches a courtroom. Because evidence is patient, it waits. And no matter how ordinary a killer's life looks on the surface, no matter how many times he walks past the house, the truth is still there, waiting to be found. We'll see you on the next one.